Hi, everybody. Welcome to another session of Sales School. Today, of course, is Thursday, the 18th of Feb. And just wanted to first of all, thank you all for your participation. A lot of you are returning attendees of Sales School, and I really appreciate you coming and helping me keep this going here because I really enjoy creating this kind of content for everybody. That being said, the one thing I wanted to encourage as well is if you ever have topics that you'd like to see covered from a prospecting perspective and a lead generation and automation perspective, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to tailor the content around what you guys are after and looking for, because these sessions are ultimately built around what will add value for you in your efforts when it comes to providing education and understanding about how this works. So without further ado, we'll dive into today's content here. So here we go. I wanted to start with kind of this image. We've got this man sitting here. He's overwhelmed. He's got a lot of paperwork around him. And the analogy here that I'm trying to convey is what we are trying to accomplish at Growth Genius is the opposite of this. We are not trying to overwhelm people. We are not trying to spam people. The fundamental kind of vision around what we do is making sure that we connect our clients to their ideal customers. And so, it's really important when you start lead generation that you keep that in mind and have, that really defined audience that we talked about way back in session 2, but make sure that everything you do and think about with your prospecting efforts are contextualized around that person. What we're going to cover today, ironically, on the technical side of sending automated emails, actually has a lot to do with keeping your audience in mind. One fundamental rule I want you to kind of consider as we walk through today's session is, are these the kind of emails that I'm writing, the kind that I would like to receive and that I would welcome into my inbox? If you keep that in mind when you build out your messaging, when you build out your campaigns, you're going to find that you are more successful because you are going to build your campaigns with that context in mind. So just taking a look at our agenda today here, we are going to cover domain setup and email warming. So we're going to talk a bit about what it is, why it's important, but we're also going to talk about how to do it, what the process is to put this in place, what are the components, and why is each step important. The next thing that we're going to talk about is message delivery best practices. So I want to frame that basically around when we're constructing campaigns and constructing these messages, what are the best practices that we want to look for, not only when we start sending, but even on an ongoing basis. Because part of our process and part of sending these automated messages is really about making sure that they do feel authentic, that they do feel targeted, and that we are listening to what the feedback is that we're getting. Not just in terms of the replies, but in terms of what we see in open rates, in reply rates, how to interpret these and understand them. The last thing that we're going to cover is how copy impacts message delivery. We don't want to ever have stale copy or let copy run stale. There's a few reasons for that, and we'll get into that there. So to kick things off here, we're going to talk about domain setups and email warming. If you've ever sat in on a Growth Genius growth consultation, you've heard us talk about this, and we're going to cover the what it is today in detail. But before we dive into that, let's start to consider what email is, and most importantly, what it is not. So the first thing is it's not publicly managed. It's not controlled and conducted by the government. The cost per message is relatively cheap / free. Yes, you may be paying for your email provider. That's sometimes the case. But even if you're paying for your email provider, there isn't a cost per message like there is with regular snail mail. You're not paying the cost of postage or anything like that. The other thing is when you're sending mail through the traditional system, your letters arrive oftentimes, more often than not, unopened. Whereas in the case of email, most often they are going to be scanned. They're going to be put through filters. They're going to go through algorithms. There's a lot of things that happen. Nobody's reading the message necessarily. Like you're not seeing Frank on the other end of the screen here poring over each word that you're writing. So don't panic. But the important thing to keep in mind is there are automated sequences set up as part of these algorithms that are designed to kind of comb through the message and look for certain patterns, because they're trying to identify, is this message safe for the recipient or not? So going back to what we talked about right at the beginning of this chat today, keep that recipient in mind. Always keep the recipient in mind. So what does this all mean for our email sending? Well, the first thing, like we just talked about, is emails are going to be analyzed for patterns, common warning signs. Here's an example. If you're sending an email campaign, you do not want to send a link in the first message of your email campaign. A link is often a red flag if it's coming from an account that the recipient account has not received an email from before. And it's a common warning sign. Think about if you were, again, on the receiving end of this, right? If you received an email from me and you never had before, and I'm pointing you to a domain, even if the domain looks safe, you're probably going to have a healthy degree of skepticism about where that domain is pointing you. So just keep it in mind that these principles that we're going to talk about today and everything that we're encompassing here is designed around building that trust, building that credibility in your sending habits. The other component here is that algorithms that are used to analyze emails are relatively unknown. So we have a healthy degree of knowledge about what they're looking for, but a lot of it is based on inferences as opposed to solid knowledge. And the reason for that is perfectly okay, because if Google and Outlook were to release their algorithms and us to fully understand every little detail that they look for, the problem is that a lot of people who are intending to email in a malicious manner or from a spam-oriented manner could easily skirt those stipulations and regulations that they're trying to put in place to protect their recipients. The last thing is senders are all assigned a reputation score based on all of this. So basically, what Google and Outlook, Yahoo, etc., are all doing is they're building an understanding of your credibility in order to understand where your message should go. If you're repeatedly sending spam messages or repeatedly sending the same exact message over and over and not even referencing the person's first name or not showing any kind of dynamics in your messaging, then that's going to be a key warning sign for these algorithms, and they are going to degrade your score. So let's talk a little bit. We've covered a bit of what this means, but let's talk about the risks, both from the low end to the high end of what this could all look like in terms of impact on your emailing, on your company even as a whole. So the first risk is you land outside the inbox, which is not desired because your intent is to get in front of your prospects. And if you're landing outside the inbox in a junk or spam folder or promotions folder, then that folder is being clicked on, accessed less frequently than the inbox. And it's largely probably going to be kind of quickly scanned via somebody's eyes as opposed to, looked at and actually given consideration. So keep that in mind as point number one. Now, risk number two, you could have your account access restricted. So if you go and abuse some of these sending policies and procedures, part of what can happen is you can actually face a situation where your account itself gets suspended from sending and receiving new emails. And this is done to prevent you from potentially spamming other people or prevent you from getting spammed. So keep that in mind. There is a restriction policy and process that these companies can pull. The last thing is you can burn a domain entirely. So if I'm sending emails from my @growthgenius.com account, and I send them so frequently, so in volumes that basically abuse what the kind of regulations are, and not just in kind of abusive volumes, but if I also kind of skirt these other recommendations that we're going to go over today, what can happen is I can actually impact negatively my entire organization. So the entire domain could get burnt. And what we mean by that is you'll basically have everybody under that domain landing more frequently in spam and junk folders, and it will require your clients, your customers to actually mark your emails as not spam. And this can cause a ton of risk for businesses. It can slow down, projects that you have underway. It can even put elements of a project at risk if they are needed to be addressed in a timely manner. And you may be responding in a timely manner, but your email may not be received in that manner. So there's a lot of risk associated with emailing the wrong way and abusing regulations and good practices that are designed to actually protect recipients. So let's talk about how to do this right. The first thing that I would say is that if you are going to today plan on engaging in cold prospecting and automated lead gen, let's start with a domain setup. So what does a domain setup look like? It looks a little like this. First, you're going to want to buy a new domain, and you want it to be on brand. So if here's an example, growthgenius.com is our core domain, but one of our lead gen domains that we use is ggleadgen.com. The name itself is tied intrinsically to two elements for us in this case. The first is the GG is obviously tied in referencing Growth Genius. The other element, the lead gen component, is actually referencing what we do. So that's a little bit of a thought starter on how to conceptualize an actual domain here and how to think about it. Just one second. I see that somebody's hand is raised. So did you want to say something?
It's good right now. I just was looking at the subjects, and I just wanted to understand how this session was actually working. There was like in the email that I was invited to, it was prospecting 101, building your ideal customer profiles, introduction copywriting, advanced copywriting. Are you going over all these subjects in this session, or are there going to be other subjects as well? Or how does it actually set up this your video presentations?
Yeah, great.
There's multiple presentations. I don't know how this works. This is the first time I've come on here.
Not a problem. So there are multiple sessions. This is the 6th session.
Okay.
The other ones are on our YouTube channel. So you can find that link in the emails provided. But the other thing to keep in mind here is not only are the YouTube links posted, but it's the Zoom. I think it's the Zoom link that you're referring to that has all those topics. Yeah. And those topics kind of take you through the journey of all our subjects, so to speak. The reason for that is because it just helps keep the Zoom link static, so it doesn't have to get updated frequently.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. So jumping back in here and talking about kind of the new domain, basically we talked about we want to make sure that it's on brand, which is great and important. The other consideration is if we can tie it to the benefit that we're going to talk about, especially with our ideal customer. The second thing we want to do is sign up for a paid. Now here we're saying G Suite account. That's just because Growth Genius ourselves, in terms of our service side of the organization, we use G Suite for our clients. So that's what we recommend and we know about. But the key thing here is setting up a provider to connect to that new domain. The third step is making sure that your SPF, DMARC, and DKIM records are set up appropriately. If you have questions about this, don't worry. There's going to be a link when I post this, and I will include a link in our follow-up email after this session that will go over what exactly those are and where those are edited. So there's a longer form article around this that'll cover the technical side. The fourth step is you want to set up domain forwarding. So ggleadgen.com, using that as our example as we continue through this, if I buy that today, it's just going to point to a random page nowhere on the internet, and there's no website for it officially. So you could return a 404 error for somebody who's trying to navigate toward it. So what we do to avoid that is we set up domain forwarding. So anybody who types ggleadgen.com would actually be forwarded to the growthgenius.com website. That allows your sending account to get linked with your actual core domain. And that way it helps build the credibility from a visual standpoint and connect the consumer to your brand and help them understand that this is where you are prospecting to them from. Make sure that they just basically don't get pointed to a random corner on the internet. The last thing you want to do is verify your completed setup. So Google has a quick check that you can perform. And additionally, on an ongoing basis, what you can do is you can go to, there's a site that's kind of pictured in the graphic below. It's mail-tester.com. The reason that you would go here and even do so on a regular basis is you can continually check the scoring on your emails and messages to see how they're holding up and to make sure that your domain still will deliver at a reasonable rate. So now we've set up our domain. What's next? The next step is email warming. So to give you a kind of quick synopsis of what email warming is before we dive into this process in a bit more detail, is email warming is designed to basically allow accounts, first and foremost, allow your account to start sending and receiving emails from various other accounts. You're basically creating conversations with a number of accounts. We usually recommend up to 100. And the reason for this is you're basically letting Google's algorithm, Outlook's algorithm, see that your account has normal activity occurring on it, right? You're not just going to turn on your account tomorrow and send out 2,000 emails or 100 emails. All of a sudden, if that happens, if those volumes come out of nowhere, their servers and their algorithms are basically going to recognize that as a key risk. You're going to be flagged as spam. And so this is kind of essential to get around that. The process takes around 3 weeks. It can take longer, as you can see even in the graphic below. But here's how it basically works. You start off by sending 5 emails per day to 5 new people each day. You're trying to make sure that the emails varied, that basically there is a lot of difference in the messaging that you're sending out, because what you ultimately want to ensure is that these conversations seem unique, seem organic. Step 2 is you're going to ramp this up a little bit. You're going to start sending 10 to 15 emails to 10 to 15 new people each day, and you're going to try to hit 100 people by the end of this. Now, you also want to ensure that you're hitting a number of different email providers, because you're not just trying to build credibility with Google's algorithm or Outlook's, you're trying to build credibility with a landscape of email algorithms and email recipient algorithms. So once you've received a bunch of replies back from these accounts, so that's a key. You want to make sure that these people all know that they're getting these emails and will be receiving them, and that they also know that they're required to reply to them, because you then would want to go in and reply to each one of these emails that you're receiving back. The reason you're doing this is you're keeping the conversation going. It's not just a one-off situation. And that allows your account to kind of develop that normalized activity. Then basically when we get to step 4 and 5 here, you want to just continue this process of keeping your account warm. Continue the sending, continue the receiving, etc. there's no real set date on when your account would officially be warm. Typically, we do say it takes 3 weeks, but sometimes it could take a little bit longer. So just keep that in mind when you are setting up your email for prospecting. So in summary, with what we talked about, it's important to think that email is unique. It is not the same as regular mail, and it is not as simple as being the electronic version of it. A lot of safeguards, a lot of elements have been put in place to protect recipients during the past number of years. And these kind of constraints and rules and regulations are put in place not just by the companies that operate these email platforms, but even sometimes by governments. And we'll cover that a little bit more later. So it's important to really consider that and keep that in mind when sending email communication like this and automated lead gen. The second thing is make sure you've got your alternate domain set up and warm an alternate email to reduce risk associated with large sending volumes. If you're not comfortable doing this yourself, no problem. There are a number of organizations, ourselves included, that are more than happy to take on the work for you and help you out in this regard. Basically, what you want to just remember at the end of all of this is that this is about building trust and credibility. It's about proving to the email providers and to your recipients that you are a valid and you are a trusted email sender. So that's a key component. Again, think about it as if you're sitting down in front of your own inbox right now. You don't want to see an email arrive in your inbox from somebody who isn't trusted. So it's the same principle when you're sending emails out. So we've covered off the email warming and domain setup. Let's talk a little bit about message delivery best practices here. So the first thing is you want to ramp up when you're sending your campaign. You don't want to start an email campaign day one, turn it on, and shoot your volume through the roof at, say, 100 emails per day. You want to start slow. Our CGM team, so those are our client growth managers, often recommend starting a campaign at around 20 emails per day that are being sent. And what they do is they ramp it up by 10 emails per day each week. It is a gradual process to get to that 100 emails per day. But what's key here is it's just continuing that process of showing you're an authentic account, building that credibility, and demonstrating that you are in this for the long haul. Make sure that you include an unsubscribe link. So in sales, we hate to see prospects walk away. We don't like it, and that's the nature of wanting to follow up regularly, making sure that we maintain a great discipline with following up. It's super important to follow up. But if somebody says to you, no, thank you, it's very important that we respect that. Having an unsubscribe link is an easy way to do this because it allows people to opt out. And when you're using automated systems, it oftentimes is embedded in the code to remove that prospect from your actual messaging. So that's a great kind of lever that you can pull. The other thing that's important to consider here is that if you do not respect their wishes when it comes to not sending them repeated communications, that can run you afoul of some of these rules and regulations, the hidden rules and regulations that are in place here by email providers. So the next thing is you've got refreshed copy and split testing. So basically the idea here is keep your copy dynamic, but also keep it updated, right? Think about the world outside. If you're messaging people and interacting with them, don't be afraid to message referencing current events. That's going to give you a great prompt in your messaging to go back and refresh it on an ongoing basis. We'll talk a little bit about this more in the last section, but I wanted to cover it here too because it is really important. The less repetition that you're including, the more unique and authentic your emails will read, not just to the recipient, but to the sending platforms as well. Sending volume ceilings. So we know that in sales, it's a numbers game. But let's keep in mind here, and first and foremost, we at Growth Genius, and I'm sure all of you, we're not in the business of spam. We're not here trying to email people who aren't related or relevant for our business. We're not trying to send people unsolicited communications that won't receive value from us. So that's kind of point number one, making sure that we anchor everything with our audience in mind. But when we're setting our volume ceilings, make sure that they're reasonable. So for email, we want to make sure that we max those out at 100 per day. And for LinkedIn connection requests, keep them at 70 per day if you have a base account. On Navigator and Premium, you can go up to 110. I personally, I just always like to play it safe. So I just sit on the side of the 70. But when we're talking about having these ceilings in place, they're protectionary measures designed to kind of insulate and protect you. So make sure that you keep this in mind when you're setting up your lead gen platform. The last thing is as well, make sure you have an hourly ceiling set. Because if you've got your daily limit set to 100 emails per day, but you also allow to send out 100 emails in a single hour, that again is something that's going to read as a red flag, especially if your emails are long. Basically, from an analysis perspective, if you're looking at this from the algorithm side, it's going to look at that and say, well, did they likely type this message out that many times? If you're sending that many, the answer is likely no. So it's a really easy way to pick up on that and flag it as a concern or risk for that. So these are all things that we should consider when we're looking at volume ceilings. The other thing that you want to do is track your rates. So an open rate and a reply rate, these aren't just indicators of your campaign success overall and how you're performing, how well your copy's written. These can be indicators and key alerts and warning signs for how your emails are being received. If they are landing in the inbox versus a spam folder, let's say. If you're noticing a campaign's open rate just drops off a cliff all of a sudden, that's probably a concern, and you may want to kind of key into that concern, understand what the driver is, and potentially turn that campaign off, make some adjustments, figure out what's going on there first. Also, go back to mail-tester.com, test out your domain, see if something has happened, see if the account for some reason from a sending perspective is compromised. Keep in mind all your watchouts as well. So regional legislation is one thing. In Canada, Australia, the EU, there are different privacy regulations that strictly try to curb spam. It doesn't curb email automation efforts, because what we're aiming to do is something more targeted, more personalized. And so we are compliant with these regions. However, the key thing that you do want to keep in mind at all times is what the context of the legislation says, what the heart of it is. And if you have to, if you're operating in these regions, brush up on what the legal interpretation of these legislations does look like. If you want specific info on this, do feel free to reach out to me. More than happy to have a conversation about specific regions, what their legislation is, how to interpret it, and basically what to do to make sure that you're on the right side here, because this stuff is super important. Second thing is, this is going back to that point about tracking your rates. So if you notice, say people are messaging you saying, hey, your email ended up in my spam folder, or if you're noticing those open rates really dip, and you've got emails going to spam, make sure that you immediately reduce the amount of cold emails you are sending by at least 50%. And increase the conversations you're having with your warming contacts. This is a sign here that you probably want to dip back into that warming pool and make sure that your account is kind of staying warm and not running afoul of any of those algorithms and any of those measurement tools that these providers have in place. The last thing you want to be aware of are honeypot email addresses. So what's a honeypot email address? Basically, if I'm a large organization, if I don't want the members of my organization receiving a large number of outbound communication, what I might choose to do is set up a couple of alternate email addresses or style addresses for members of my organization, and then intentionally provide them to some random websites. And the idea here is to kind of catch you emailing these websites, because basically what will end up happening is your account from a sending perspective will immediately be blacklisted by this organization. But when that provider reads your account being blacklisted, it's going to kind of affect your email sending with that provider as well. So just keep that in mind, that these little tricks are out there to kind of curb your sending habits. So make sure that you're using a trusted data provider. Also make sure that, if you can, you're running your emails through a verifier. Email verification is a critical component. So in summary here, make sure that you ramp up your volumes gradually when sending. This is part of your messaging best practices. Include an unsubscribe link. Refresh your copy and split tests. Use your split tests even to inform your refreshed copy. We'll talk about that in just a second. Set your volume ceilings and track your rates. Again, can't emphasize this enough. Just always consider, is this how I'd like to receive communication? If it's not, probably worth editing your parameters, editing your copy, editing how you're going to market here. Always keep that in mind. So our last section today is going to talk about how copy impacts message delivery. Before diving into the next slide, the first and easiest way to talk about copy and how it impacts message delivery is that over time, if you're sending the exact same message, it can very quickly go stale. And the message can A, cease to resonate with an audience, but B, from an email provider standpoint and an email platform standpoint, they're going to see that same message just being sent over months of a time, and what's going to end up happening is they're going to say, well, this email is just like a copy paste email, therefore it's going to be more spammy, and it's going to reduce your deliverability rates. So how to avoid slacking on your copy? The first thing is, we've got a message in front of us here. So let's talk about, the anatomy of an average message, what it looks like. And we're going to talk about various levers that we can pull with each component of this message in order to actually keep our messaging flexible, keep it dynamic. So first, you've got your hook. This is often your opener. It's designed to promote interest and engage somebody up front. The next component you have is going to be your body. Your body's designed to contextualize the conversation. What you're saying in your body is, and what you're including here, is going to be a lot of elements related to what you are doing, who you are, and what you can offer your client in terms of benefits, or prospect in terms of benefits. Just 1 second. What about standard messages, such as sign up or log in failure? Martin, do me a favor. Can you just raise your hand in here? Or maybe what I can do is, perfect, thank you. So what messages are you referring to specifically about sign up or login failure?
When we've got a service that we're providing to users, and when they sign up, they get an email.
Okay, perfect.
And so often it goes to spam, and it's like a problem. And so we're just wondering how to deal with that as well.
So the first thing that I would check with respect to that is what your domain looks like. Because if you're sending from a platform perspective, to me, what that's telling me is, because a lot of like Google and Outlook, for example, when somebody signs up for a platform and provides their email in sign up, then a lot of times it's almost like a digital tag that's referenced, and it allows the platform to identify that they have signed up. So it might be an actual domain issue there. I'm not as familiar with this issue specifically, so I would just dig into this one a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so we've got the hook, we've got the body, and now the last component of the message we have is the close. So your close is going to be, a lot of different things. Sometimes in sales, we might kind of look to push ourselves in one direction when it comes to a close. We might look at things, let's say, like we might lean heavily on the, would you like to have a meeting, say, as an example, as part of a close. But there are various closes to consider here and incorporate, such as the interest close. Does this sound like something you're interested in? Seems like a very subtle difference, but the subtle difference plays a large part in how you can be dynamic in your copy. So taking a look at refreshing ideas for updating and keeping your messaging fresh and dynamic is with the hook. Consider referencing recent trends or events. So coming out of the year that we just had, there were a ton of recent events and things that happened on a regular basis that affected organizations, our customers, and these are great things to reference to show not only that you are staying up to date with their needs, but also that it gives you an opportunity to convey empathy, to be human, because that's what we're trying to do in our interactions. Even if we're trying to scale them up and make sure that we're doing them, at a faster pace and leveraging technology, we still don't want to divorce ourselves from the fact that we are human beings trying to engage in and start relationships with other human beings. So don't forget to be human in that regard. The second area is your body. So using data from your split tests, understand what body copy is working better, or even still, understand what messages in your chain work better. You may also want to consider removing a message entirely from your sequence. Let's say your fifth message in your sequence lands very poorly. You may just want to nix it completely. And elements like this that reduce the repetition, reduce the elements of a pattern being actually developed, will help you in terms of your deliverability, making sure that you always land in the inbox and protecting your domains. The last thing you want to do is look at the close. So we already covered this, but just to recap, leverage different closing styles, different techniques, an interested close versus an assumed close. And I was probably intending to say versus the meeting there. Apologies for that. But versus like an actual meeting booking, you basically want to make sure that your messages stay dynamic, stay fresh, but there are lots of simple levers to pull to do this. You don't have to overwhelm yourself, and you certainly do not have to edit all of these in a single message every time you refresh copy. You can do one at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself, keep it simple. The other thing that we want to make sure that we do is incorporate our learnings. So I keep coming back to this, but when it comes to your split tests, we've got an example here where subject line A outperforms subject line B by 26%. So why would we continue adding prospects to subject line B? It doesn't make sense at that point. What we probably want to do, we might still use the same body copy. The body copy might be perfectly all right, but we may want to be a bit more dynamic with our actual messaging and subject lines. So make sure you keep it dynamic on that front as well. So in summary, stale copy can become a risk in message delivery. The second component is use your messages anatomy as a guide. So basically take a look at what the structure of your message is and try to conceive like, what am I doing here? What am I doing in this block of text? And what am I doing in this last block of text? And understand, where you can be flexible, what you can be flexible with, and not only how you can make the message better, that don't just refresh it to refresh it, but always remember to refresh it in a way that will build more engagement, build more readership, and build more replies. Going back to the example that I referenced about referencing trends in the marketplace, trends change on an ongoing basis. Or I guess you have fads that even come in. And so there's no shame in referencing a fad and then updating and refreshing your copy a month later to reference the next fad that's come to the forefront of our engagement and our attention as an audience. The last thing is incorporate your learnings. Make sure you look at the metrics, look at what the numbers, what the data is telling you, and follow that data, because it's there to help guide you and present you with an understanding of how you can improve your messaging, one, but two, also with how it's landing, how it's working. And lastly, if necessary, it can be a key indicator of where your messages are ending up. Your open rates, your reply rates, referencing our last conversation that we had, keep in mind your open rates should be at all times around 30%. Okay, if they're lower, you might want to assess why. Could be as simple as your copy, but it could be something more. The second component here is make sure that when we're incorporating our learnings, that we also take note of messages that can be kind of outright deleted from our sequence if they're not adding value. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. Our next session will be Thursday, March 18th at 4 p.m. Eastern. Again, if you have subjects that you would like to see me cover, please shoot me an email, send me a note, no problem. More than happy to go over that. Secondly, if you want to talk about regional legislation and how it may affect your sending and automated prospecting, please get in touch with me. More than happy to have a sit-down conversation with you about it. The last thing that I would like to mention is that there will be some links that I will be sharing. So I'll be sharing a link to our CEO and co-founder, Brandon Pizzacala's note about email warming and domain setups, so that you can actually see the specific elements that you'll want to look at and incorporate as you go through each process. The other link that I'll be sharing is the mail tester link. So thank you very much for that. 1 second, just before everybody hops off here. Okay, perfect. So if there's no other questions or concerns, I look forward to our next session, and I'll get this posted in the next couple of days on our YouTube channel. Thanks, everybody. Take care.